What's up, folks? Nate here at Two Wheel Dyno Works. I am back on the dyno today with our 2025 Honda Transalp, and I have just wrapped up our low or standard mount, slip-on, and full exhaust system testing and tuning. On the prior generation, I went ahead and did these as separate videos showing just the slip-on first. As you can see, we've got the Acura there, and then the full Acura when we installed the header. But because we already know what to expect out of this engine, having now offered tuning for it for both the prior generation Transalp and the CB750, I went ahead and just condensed this down into one video to show you guys the performance improvements that the setups provide from just a slip-on with our custom ECU mapping and with a full exhaust and our custom ECU mapping in place, just so you can have a all-in-one picture here of what you're going to get doing just the slip-on or doing the whole full system, and why we recommend, honestly, on these bikes, just doing the full system. But before we dive into the specific performance improvements that either setup provide, let's quickly just recap where this bike started from in bone stock configuration and the enormous improvements we were already able to uncork with just our custom ECU mapping in place for the bike in stock trim. So the red line there is the bike in 100% bone stock configuration, 75.7 horsepower, 49.7 pound-feet of torque, and a power curve that looks terrible, especially above 8,500 RPM. And blue is with our custom ECU mapping in place for the bike in still 100% bone stock trim. Power comes up to 84.5 horsepower, 52.7 pound-feet of torque, and you have enormous gains right here off the bottom and massive ones up here at the top end of the rev range. It truly doesn't even feel like the same motorcycle anymore once it's properly tuned, but this is truly just the starting point, because once you start uncorking the exhaust system, the performance figures keep climbing. So now that we know what the bike is capable of with the stock intake and exhaust still installed, let's go ahead and dive into the performance modifications of the exhaust system. And step one is obviously, for pretty much everybody, installing a slip-on. Let's face it, the stock muffler looks and sounds like a sewing machine. Something like this Acura slip-on both performs and sounds significantly better than the OEM pipe. The green line there that I've introduced to the graph is the Acura slip-on on our bike with our custom ECU mapping now modified to match the new airflow characteristics of that muffler. You can see the peak power does come up about 2 horsepower. You went from 84.5 to 86.5. You are gaining quite a bit up there, but through the rest of the rev range here, you're really only gaining 1 or 2 horsepower and about 1 or 2 pound-feet of torque depending upon where you look. Because, as I've said in our prior videos, the slip-ons are not the big restriction on these exhaust systems. As with most modern motorcycles, the header on these bikes is just fundamentally flawed from a design standpoint if you're looking to maximize performance. It also has a pretty significantly sized catalytic converter in place, which just acts like a heat sink in the exhaust system, and which keeps the bike just running significantly warmer than it ever really needs to, if that weren't actually there. So by installing an aftermarket header on this bike, like we have with the Akrapovic header here to mate up with the Akrapovic slip-on, performance even further goes up in both terms of horsepower and torque throughout the entirety of the rev range. The orange line there on this now messy looking graph is the bike as it sits on our dyno right now with the full Akrapovic system installed, meaning their header and slip-on is in place with our custom ECU mapping once again optimized for the new airflow characteristics that it provides. As you can see here, you are gaining significant power and torque, like I said, throughout the entirety of the rev range, with peak output, now coming up to about 88.5 horsepower, but torque coming up to a solid 56. And through the middle portion of the rev range here, right between, I'd say, about 6,000 RPM and 7,500 RPM, where you're spending a vast majority of the time riding this bike, is where the biggest performance improvements are to be had. Again, the OEM header here just sucks, so getting something like the Acura header installed, or really any header that just gets rid of the OEM design, is going to provide you with these significant mid-range improvements and a nice bump in peak power as well. Now, when you're looking at those dyno graphs with every single step of modification shown, it gets a little bit convoluted, and honestly, the graph gets a little messy and hard to read. So I'm going to show you really quick what the fundamentally important part here is to understand, and that is how these bikes come off the showroom floor versus how you can have them performing with nothing more than bolt-on exhaust system components and our custom ECU mapping in place, because that's the difference you should all be looking at, and it is truly astounding. Right down here off the bottom of the rev range at 4,000 RPM, you are gaining more than 25% more torque with a full exhaust and our custom tuning in place. That's absolutely insane. And honestly, what you feel more than anything is all of this big mid-range torque that you're gaining and how much massively smoother the throttle feels with our custom tuning in place. Yes, you're still gaining more than 25% more power out here at 9,300 RPM, where the new peak power is generated in this setup, but you don't spend a lot of time up here. So while on a dynograph this looks amazing, and it's a really cool performance improvement to see, this massive improvement to bottom end and mid-range torque is really what you're feeling on these bikes. And I truly can't stress it enough, it completely transforms how these things ride. Now, as we've talked about in our prior videos on the prior generation Transalp, there are some differences from one exhaust configuration to the next. And the significant differences are whether or not you're going with a low or standard mount full exhaust system, which is like the Acca that we have on the bike now, or one of the higher mount systems, which give you quite a bit more ground clearance for more off-road technical riding. Now, as we've shown in the prior videos as well, there is a bit of a loss by having the extra pipe routing and bends in place to get to the full high mount systems or the high mount slip-ons, but we will still show you those here in the next video that we're going to cover, so you can kind of pick and choose and decide what you ultimately need for your specific riding, because let's face it, a lot of folks aren't going to be doing very technical or extreme riding and single track stuff on these bikes, but some of you are, so obviously we're going to build custom fuel mapping for all of you out there, regardless of what intake and exhaust setup you want to put on these bikes. And as we did on the prior generation bike, we will also be covering intake mods on these Transalps. That will just be coming in a later video. Now, if you're looking to get our custom ECU mapping flashed into your Transalp's ECU, head over to twowheeldynoworks.com, purchase our mail-in ECU flashing service on our site for $349.99, follow the instructions on our site, and ship it to us, and we'll get it flashed and shipped right back out to you the very same day we receive it. And if you still have any questions about different intake or exhaust setups or tuning or whatever it is on these bikes, do not hesitate to email us in the meantime at support@twowheeldynoworks.com. I personally answer any and all tech support questions every single day we're open here at the shop, and both myself and my staff are always truly happy to help.